This was originally for humans are space orcs. The writing prompt was humans will settle and live in the worst places possible. Utgar turned off the advertising beacon and turned on the temporarily out-of-service automatic message. He was an Ursoid dealer in salvage. He was once a respected ship repair dock owner, but some bad luck with some bad bets had left him bereft. Everyone likes a little gambling, and when a Menix gambler put up his own ship dock on an utterly impossible long shot, Utgar couldn't resist. He was about to double his business because the Menix was willing to risk everything on a race because the ship's logo was the same as his astrology birth sign. Menix were well known for their advanced astronomy and fanatical adherence to astrology. The ship the Menix was betting on had a substandard engine with an inexperienced pilot and needed several repairs. But the local ringed planet and moons that were the race course were going to be intersecting the visual line of sight of the Menix astrology constellation, which he had interpreted as a guaranteed omen of victory. The other gamblers and race enthusiasts had laughed uproariously at the Menix, who was seeking wealthy gamblers who could match his bet. Other Menix present had joined their fellow avian, also certain of the omen. To match the bet, Utgar had bet his entire business, including a scrap and salvage depot. The unbelievable victory was probably the strongest evidence ever that could proselytize aliens into Menix astrology. The race course involved circling around the ringed planet and several of its moons, passing through the rings and dodging cosmic debris. Utgar's racer had easily outpaced the Menix racer, as one of the neglected repairs seemed to be intermittent power failures. However, the one thing that the inexperienced pilot could do well was restart the engine. The Ursoid's racer was having to stall quite often to slow enough to maneuver through the prescribed course, sometimes having to go through a section repeatedly. The Menix racer would simply suffer a power failure, drift. Then, when the pilot saw the ship oriented correctly, he would kick on the engine again. The result was that the pilot actually steered through the course in the most efficient way possible, by sheer dumb luck. The Menix racer exited the course just ahead of the Ursoid racer, with the last straight stretch to the finish line. The Ursoid racer easily gained, then passed the Menix. It seemed like certain victory, except the Menix ship had shot a grappling line at the Ursoid ship. The sudden jerk had thrown the Ursoid off course. The Menix ship released the grappler line and continued plodding along to the finish. Once the Menix ship reoriented, it came back, making a beeline for the finish. Just as it was about to pass the Menix ship again, the Menix ship suffered another power failure. In a panic, the pilot immediately restarted the engine, even though the racer wasn't pointed in the right direction. The Ursoid racer crashed into it, suffering slight cosmetic damage. The Menix racer wasn't so lucky. The poor space dinghy practically exploded on impact, with the pilot cabin getting stuck on the nose of the Ursoid ship. The Ursoid ship flew through the finish, with the terrified Menix pilot desperately clinging for dear life. Nothing left of his ship but the pilot cabin and the piece of hull with the logo. Utgar had roared in triumph, thinking of the wealth he had just acquired, until the gambling coordinator came up to him, demanding the ownership titles to Utgar's wagered property. It seemed that as long as the pilot and any portion of the ship arrived at the finish, it counted for finishing the race. Even though the Menix piece of ship hadn't been using its own power, since it was attached to the front edge of the Ursoid ship, it had technically crossed the finish first. Utgar had tried to argue against the use of the grappler line, but physical grappling devices were considered too primitive to be mentioned by the rules, and therefore legal. Utgar was beside himself. His wife was pregnant with twins and about to start prenatal hibernation. He had eagerly looked forward to telling her before she fell unconscious, or perhaps surprising her when she awoke to give birth. Instead, he was completely bankrupt. He had no idea how to face his wife. Fortunately for Utgar, the refreshment server was an attractive female that managed to convince the Menix gambler that the local deity would curse him for leaving Utgar completely destitute. Her culture highly esteemed luck and charity to the impoverished. If you dropped currency on the ground, you had to leave it. If you picked it up instead of leaving it for someone in need, then the local god would punish you for your greed. The Menix was skeptical about how much influence an alien deity could have, but decided not to risk it. He gave Utgar the scrap and storage yard back. Utgar's wife was in a rage at the news, backhanding him with all of her strength. As she vented her considerable wrath on Utgar, onlookers noted that it was the most impressive display of domestic violence that they had ever seen. The same refreshment server, surely a disguised, benevolent, divine being herself, had slipped Utgar a huge serving of fat, marbled meat with a large side of sweet berries and other fresh fruits to give her as an apology gift when breaking the news at home. She had eaten the meal and wandered off to her slumber/birthing area, still spewing terrifying threats as she drifted off to sleep. Utgar had been out a couple days later, looking for repair shops or recyclables dealers that he could potentially sell salvage to, when he encountered a drunk and grizzled human veteran begging. The veteran appeared to be well past his prime and was missing part of an arm and a leg. Just then, another passerby bumped into Utgar, causing him to drop several pieces of currency. Utgar stared at the precious money which had landed at the leg stump of the veteran. Utgar and the human had looked at each other for a moment, and Utgar remembered the server's admonition about not picking up dropped currency. Desperate for any good luck to be found in the universe, Utgar told the veteran to keep the currency. The human had thanked him profusely, then pulled out an alcohol flask and invited Utgar to sit with him and share the flask. They talked, sharing their troubles. The human shared the story of how he had lost his limbs in an internal conflict called Blood River. Utgar had heard of human savagery and rumors of how horrific the Blood River incident was, which the veteran seemed to confirm. Utgar told the story of his failed gamble, to which the vet replied, "Damn, Smokey, I'd rather go back to Blood River than tell my pregnant old lady something like that." Utgar was puzzled at the nickname, Smokey. Evidently, before joining the galactic community, humans had worshipped every type of god conceivable, including deities that appeared as non-sentient animals. This god, Smokey, was a primitive Ursoid, who was the guardian of forests and warred against the god of fire. When hearing of Utgar's salvage yard, the human perked up. "Hey, Smokey, are any of those old ships habitable? They don't have to fly, just keep you from freezing and cooking out in the black." Utgar confirmed he had a handful of such ships that he wanted to repair but didn't have the funds. The human chuckled. "That's all right, Smokey. You let me bunk down in one of those ships and I'll help you move the rest." See, I was a comms specialist before I got blown to modern art, and my papa worked as an independent freight hauler. I know transponder codes to networks where you can find customers. Do we have a deal? The human stuck out his intact hand. Utgar was unsure of what to do, so he extended his own paw hand. The human had clasped 3 of Utgar's fingers in his own tiny hand, gently jerking the fingers up and down. "It's called a handshake. My people do it to show agreement, especially when making a deal." The human had moved into one of the derelicts and immediately got to work. He did seem to make some psychological progress, reducing the amount of time he became intoxicated every day to a few hours in the evening. He was good for his promise. He got onto the communications channels, reaching out to potential buyers. Human language was bizarre, to say the least, but this seemed to bring it to a whole new level. Xenolinguists and translation AIs always had ongoing issues with human languages. Why can't they pick just one? With some linguists speculating that each human actually invented its own dialect. Xenoarchaeologists who studied human history weren't surprised by the number of conflicts that came from miscommunications, but rather that there weren't more. It seemed that the most formidable human trait wasn't physical, such as claws or size, aggressiveness, or even intelligence, but the ability to survive and thrive in chaos. Utgar's wife would occasionally awaken briefly during her gestational hibernation to eat and hit Utgar again. Utgar kept the human out of sight, not sure how his wife would react and not wanting to take the risk. Unfortunately, she did awaken when Utgar and the human were arguing about the name of the salvage yard. Utgar wanted to keep the original name, but the human wanted to change it to Sarge's Salvage because the vast majority of the customers were human and thought that would attract more. Utgar's wife lumbered in, irritable from hunger and the noise, and getting more pissed off by the minute. She wandered in, took one look around, then snarled at both of them. Utgar quickly ran to get her food and settled her into a couch that could accommodate her massive girth. "Dear, good news! I'd like you to meet—" She snapped her teeth at Utgar's arm, then began eating, glaring at the human the whole time. The transponder chirped insistently, and the human smiled sheepishly. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Smokey. I'd chat some more, but they're calling me." He hobbled out of the room quickly as she growled at him. Utgar stood by nervously, fetching additional helpings of anything she might want more of. Finally, she finished and gave a belch. She shook her head at Utgar. "You cannot be serious. On top of losing our livelihood gambling, somehow you thought it would be a good idea to bring home a pet, while I'm pregnant no less. And of all the vermin to choose from, you picked a human. A human! Those things are from a Class 9 death world. Do you have any idea of what kind of pathogens those things carry? And just when I think that there is absolutely no possible way for you to think of something stupider, you managed to surprise me. Again! You brought home a defective human. It's nothing but stumps. It can't even be trained to perform useful tasks because it's missing body parts. It has no function except to eat excess food before it spoils." Utgar tried to soothe her. "My darling, just let me explain a moment. You see—" She roared and swung at him. Fortunately, her broad stomach kept her firmly settled in the couch, so the blow was fairly weak. She grumbled, "At least the children will have something to play with." Just then she noticed the human standing in the doorway to the room. "And something to eat." She got up from the couch and waddled back to her bed. After she passed out and began snoring thunderously, the human spoke. "Wow, you weren't kidding about Mrs. Smokey. Was she serious about eating?" Utgar shrugged. Ursoid women get rather irritable during pregnancy. Our justice system actually has a set of laws dealing specifically with pregnant females that affects charging, verdicts, and sentencing. The human rolled his eyes. "So what's the policy? Let them do whatever the hell they want." Utgar nodded, "Pretty much." The human replied, "Yeah, it's pretty much the same with us too." Utgar fetched them hot beverages while the human briefed him. In that bizarre hybrid language the human used that was a verbal casserole of different human languages, transport guild jargon, and military nomenclature, buyers for derelicts and several random parts had been found. It seemed there was a tribe of humans, bizarre even by their standards, called orange throats, that eschewed civilized life, preferring to live in unregulated flotillas or on barely survivable death worlds. They were political anarchists, distrustful of any organized government, even disaster and poverty relief agencies. They also were distrustful of regimented education, especially any subject that didn't have immediate tangible applications. However, they were truly masters of improvised engineering. Anything that didn't explode performed far better than one would have thought possible. 3 days later, the orange throat representative arrived with his family. He was tall, almost painfully skinny, but with ropey muscles and tendons. His chest garment was a thin, white sleeveless pullover tunic. His groin and leg garment were trousers made from a heavy blue cloth. His feet were in heavy shoes that appeared to be the processed hide of an animal. He had a currency container that was attached to his trousers with a long tether. The container also had shreds of a noxious plant that the human chewed like cud. The human quite fond of the cud, keeping so much of it in his mouth that it actually caused a small lump in the bottom of his face. The human wore a head covering that was deliberately slightly askew, not sideways nor straight. The human also had an insignia applied to the skin of his upper arm, at the shoulder, that matched a large insignia painted on his ship. His ship looked like scrap that was most likely to be abandoned at the salvage yard, except the insignia was painted on with fresh, bright colors. It was a red rectangle with 2 blue intersecting lines, and the lines had silver-white stars. He introduced himself as Earl. Earl's wife, Wanda Jean, was as opposite as possible of him while still being the same species. He had pale skin while hers was dark. He was tall with his head up to Utgar's shoulder. She was short, with her own head not even reaching her husband's shoulder. Her husband looked almost emaciated, but she was excessively plump, to the point of looking ready to give birth to at least 4 offspring. When Utgar congratulated her on her impending delivery, she glared at him angrily. Utgar took it in stride. Pregnant females were always hostile. He offered her food and the comfortable couch. They had several offspring with them. Utgar noticed she would randomly swing to hit one now and then, as his own wife would occasionally do. Maybe humans and Ursoids weren't so different after all. The one thing Utgar found repugnant was that she had small tubes of plants that she would set on fire, then inhale the smoke. Evidently, the small tubes were the same plant that Earl had for his cud. Earl, Utgar, and the salvage yard human sat down to negotiate prices and inventory. Earl had both currency and random salvage to offer in trade. They joked, argued, and haggled for a few hours while sharing a few alcoholic beverages. As they were finishing up, Utgar's wife came waddling in sleepily. She looked around and gave a low growl. Wanda Jean stood up. "Hey, sugar, let me get out of your way. I'm so sorry that my kids and these dumbass men woke you up. Now you just sit and relax. I hear you're expecting. I'll go grab you something to eat." Wanda Jean went to the kitchen and made a huge plate for Utgar's wife. She brought it back as the men were trying to talk in hushed tones. She barked at them. "If you can't keep it down, go outside," Earl hollered back. "We're in space, woman." She retorted, "Don't let the airlock hit you in the ass on the way out." Earl grumbled, then the men moved their negotiations to Earl's ship. It turned out to be pretty efficient, since Earl was able to get a closer look at available inventory and actually wound up purchasing far more than he had originally bid for. Once the men were gone, Wanda Jean and Utgar's wife chatted. They exchanged stories about their children and the incredible dumbassery of their husbands. At one point, when Wanda Jean heard about the bad bet, she exclaimed, "Damn, girl, you let him live? I thought I was married to the king of idiots, but that's just a whole other level. And then he goes bringing home some raggedy dude you don't know from Adam. I got the same problem with mine. He rides his ships rough, so we are always spending money on repairs. And then his stupid cousin Bobby John comes by because he's lost another job, and his wife won't let him back in the ship until he gets another one. So then I'm stuck with the both of them." Utgar's wife shook her head. "Why do you allow this Bobby John to stay?" Wanda Jean sighed. "When Earl's pawpaw made his will, he knew Bobby John would lose his half of the inheritance within a year, so he made a deal with Earl. Earl got everything, but he has to take care of Bobby John. You know how it goes with family. You love them, but just can't stand being around them." Utgar's wife and Wanda Jean laughed over that and kept chatting. Wanda laughed so hard she cried when she heard the part about how Utgar had adopted a defective pet human that probably lost body parts drinking excessively, now being reduced to stumps. Wanda slammed her hand on the armrest of her chair. "Here, boy, here, Stumpy, sit, roll over, Stumpy, Stumpy, come." On Earl's ship, Utgar asked, "What do you think they're talking about?" Earl said, "Whatever it is, I'm pretty sure it's somehow going to wind up being my fault somehow." He looked at the other human. "If you ever think about getting married, remember this. It won't stop you, but at least you won't be surprised." The men chuckled as Earl found a derelict that was missing half the ship, but still added it to the inventory list. Utgar asked, "I thought you were just looking for relatively intact structures. Why do you want that?" Earl answered, "Our flotilla is by the nebula that's on the border between the Unla and the Denari. Between the storms and the occasional crossfire from border disputes, our ships take a beating." Utgar and the other human looked at him wide-eyed, then Utgar blurted out, "Are you people insane? More than usual for your kind? You must be in some sort of mass suicide death cult to live there." Earl chuckled, spit out his cud, took a long drink from his beer, put in a new, larger piece of cud that distorted his speech slightly, then adjusted his hat a few times, back the same askew position it was in moments ago. "That little piece of hell is the best place to be, because ain't no damn government constantly trying to crawl up your ass. Out there, folk leave you alone, but will help you out in a second when you need it. Yeah, it's dangerous sometimes, but we are all so free. Your neighbor minds his own damn business as long as you ain't hurting anybody. And we ain't got no damn government stealing our wages to give it to lazy bastards who don't want to work every time they want to get reelected and need votes. They can kiss my whole ass. My money is mine, to feed my family, not some lazy bastard that thinks the universe owes him." Utgar blinked rapidly, taking in everything Earl just said. It seemed that the rumors regarding the Orange Throat human tribe were all true, and if anything, understated their ideology. The veteran nodded along, then raised his beer in a toast. "Damn right, fuck 'em!" This left Utgar even more confused, but to be polite, he clinked his bottle against the others. "I'm confused. You are a veteran. You took an oath to support your government and fought to defend it, and yet you have strong disdain for it? That doesn't make sense." The human chuckled. As a vet, I have the most experience with the government, which is why I'm the first one to say not to trust the bastards. That should tell you something." That statement confused Utgar even more. He had learned that when a human didn't make sense, then gave you an explanation that made even less sense, your best option was to simply let it go. He had tried to follow up with more questions during previous encounters. It always ended one of two ways. Either the human would start repeating the same explanation over and over, or the human would come up with more explanations, each one making even less sense than the previous one, until it got to the point that you couldn't even remember the original question. The men went back, with the humans being mildly drunk and committed to becoming fully inebriated to celebrate the deal. Utgar wanted to join them, but was hesitant considering his wife's pregnancy irritability and ongoing displeasure at their current financial state. The salvage yard human had chuckled. "I guarantee you Mrs. Smokey will be in a much better mood when she sees the currency." When they walked in, Wanda Jean and Utgar's wife took one look at the three of them, then burst out laughing. The salvage yard human looked nervous. "Are we in trouble?" Utgar replied, "They aren't trying to hit us, so that's a good sign, I think." Earl extended a fist towards Utgar. "Truth, brother. Happy wife. Happy life." Utgar wasn't sure what to do as Earl kept the fist extended, so he gently clasped it in his own paw hand and shook it like the human handshake. Utgar went to the kitchen to get more beers for the men. He was quite relieved to see that Wanda Jean had been feeding his wife steadily. He eagerly told her of the deal he just closed. She gave a half smile. "Well, it looks like Stumpy has made himself useful after all." The salvage yard human gave them a flat look and shrugged. He had been called worse. As Earl and Wanda Jean left, Earl gave a copy of his music archive to Utgar, along with the contact information of several other potential customers. A few of his personal favorites were ancient ballads about cargo transport adventures and mishaps. His pet's favorite was a quick-paced song that described alcohol smuggling, and it even inspired several theatrical performances where the smugglers evaded incompetent law enforcement. Wanda Jean promised to call and visit, especially once the children were born, and bring a treat called Peach Cobbler. Recording of commercial transponder signal, "Eastbound and down, loaded up and trucking. We're going to do what they say can't be done. We got a long way to go, and a short time to get there. We're eastbound, and watch that bandit run. Come on down to Stumpy's, best salvage yard in 1,000 light years. Whether you're looking for ships, parts, or that one-of-a-kind find, we got it. Meet Smokey, Mrs. Smokey, and the Little Smokes. Bring the family. We do buy, sell, trade, so if you're looking to unload some stuff, we will give you trade and credit. Keep your ears on for great specials, and we have an inventory list. Coordinates and inventory catalog are embedded in this announcement. No holds and all sales final. Down the Rock Island line, she's a mighty good road Rock Island line. It's the road to ride Rock Island line. It's a mighty good road. Well, if you ride it, you got to ride it like you find it. Get your ticket at the station for the Rock Island line **.